You know, there's something rather peculiar that happens to certain people. They walk into a room and they feel it all. The unspoken tension between two friends, the hidden sadness behind a smile. And we've been told this is a gift, haven't we? This ability to see what others miss. But I want to suggest something quite different to you today. That this very ability, this clear seeing, might be the most dangerous thing you'll ever possess. Now, I'm not speaking of danger in the ordinary sense. I'm not talking about physical harm. I'm speaking of something far more subtle and far more devastating. The danger of becoming so aware that you can no longer participate in the beautiful unconsciousness that allows most people to live their lives in relative peace. Have you ever watched people at a party? Really watched them? They're playing a game, you see. Everyone knows the rules without ever being told. You ask how someone is, they say fine. And you both pretend this is a complete answer. You compliment the host, you laugh at jokes that aren't particularly funny. You nod sympathetically at stories you've heard before. It's a kind of collective agreement to stay on the surface, to keep things pleasant, to not look too deeply. But then there's you, the one who sees through it all. You notice the wife who flinches slightly when her husband speaks. You sense the colleague who's desperately lonely, despite being surrounded by friends. You feel the anxiety rippling through the room like an invisible current. And here's where the danger begins. Because once you see these things, you cannot unsee them. And more troubling still, your very presence becomes a kind of mirror that others cannot bear to look into. Let me tell you what I mean. When you see clearly, when you perceive the hidden currents beneath social interaction, you're essentially calling attention to what everyone has agreed to ignore. And people don't like this. They really don't like this. Not because they're bad or stupid, but because your clarity threatens the very structure that allows them to function. Think of it this way. Society is rather like a stage play. Everyone has their part. The successful businessman, the devoted mother, the reliable friend. These are roles, you understand. Costumes we put on. And the play works beautifully, so long as everyone stays in character. But you, with your penetrating awareness, you're like an audience member who stands up in the middle of the performance and shouts, "But that's just an actor pretending." Well, you can imagine how welcome that makes you. The first danger then is isolation. And I don't mean the ordinary loneliness of not having enough friends. I mean something far more profound. The isolation of living in a completely different reality from everyone around you. You're speaking a language nobody else understands. You're seeing a world nobody else can see. And the terrible irony is that the more clearly you perceive, the more alone you become. I once knew a woman, let's call her Sarah, who had this extraordinary ability to read people. She could walk into a room and immediately sense who was genuine and who was performing, who was in pain and who was pretending to be fine, who could be trusted and who was hiding something. And you know what happened to her? She lost every close relationship she had. Not because she was cruel or judgmental, but simply because people felt exposed around her. They couldn't maintain their comfortable masks in her presence. Her friends would say things like, "You're too intense. You read too much into everything and you cry. Can't you just relax and have fun?" But she couldn't. Because seeing clearly isn't something you can turn on and off like a light switch. It's like asking someone who can hear to simply ignore sound. Once you've developed this capacity for perception, it's always there, always operating, always showing you what others prefer to keep hidden. And here's the second danger. When you see the truth of a situation, when you perceive what's really happening beneath the surface, you face a terrible choice. Do you speak or stay silent? If you speak, you risk being attacked. And I mean this quite literally, though the attack is usually psychological rather than physical. You'll be called negative, overly sensitive, a troublemaker. You'll be accused of creating problems that don't exist, of reading malice into innocent situations, of being unable to just let things be. But if you stay silent, if you swallow what you see and pretend not to notice, you begin to lose contact with yourself. Because every time you ignore your own perception, every time you accept someone else's version of reality when you know it's false, you're essentially telling yourself that your experience cannot be trusted. And over time, this creates a kind of split in your being. Part of you knows the truth, but another part must pretend not to know it. This is madness of a very quiet sort. I remember years ago sitting in a meeting where everyone was congratulating themselves on how well a particular project was going. And I could see clear as day that the whole thing was about to collapse. The signs were everywhere. The forced enthusiasm, the avoidance of certain topics, the way people's eyes would slide away when difficult questions arose. But when I gently suggested that perhaps we should examine some concerning patterns, I was met with hostility. Not argument, mind you. Not reasoned disagreement. Pure defensive hostility. And this brings us to the third danger, the most insidious one. When you see clearly and others don't want to see, they will often turn their anger on you. Not consciously, perhaps. They won't sit down and decide to make you the villain. But unconsciously, automatically, they will begin to treat you as the problem, as if your perception is creating the very difficulties you're merely observing. This is what I call the phenomenon of shooting the messenger. When someone points out that the emperor has no clothes, the crowd doesn't thank them for the truth. The crowd turns on them for disturbing the comfortable fiction everyone was enjoying. Your clarity becomes a threat, and threats must be eliminated or controlled. I've watched this pattern repeat itself countless times. The person who sees clearly gets labeled. They're too negative. They're creating drama. They're unstable. They need to lighten up. They're paranoid. Notice how all these labels have one thing in common. They all suggest that the problem lies in the perceiver, not in what's being perceived. It's a brilliant defensive maneuver, really. If we can convince you that your perception is flawed, we never have to look at what you're perceiving. But here's what nobody tells you. The fourth danger is perhaps the most devastating of all. When you're constantly absorbing the emotional states and hidden truths of everyone around you, when you're perpetually picking up on what's unspoken and unfelt, you begin to lose track of what actually belongs to you. Your own feelings become mixed up with everyone else's. You walk into a room feeling perfectly fine and leave feeling inexplicably anxious or sad or angry. And you have no idea if these feelings are yours or if you've simply absorbed them from the environment like a sponge soaking up water. This is exhausting beyond measure. Imagine never quite knowing which thoughts are your own, never being certain whether the emotion you're feeling belongs to you or to the person sitting next to you. It's like trying to hear your own voice in a room full of people all talking at once. Eventually, you might forget what your voice even sounds like. I've spoken with people who describe this experience, and they often say the same thing. I feel like I'm disappearing, like there's less and less of me and more of everyone else. And this isn't poetry. This is a real psychological danger. When the boundaries between self and other become too permeable, when you're taking in too much without adequate protection, you can actually lose contact with your own center, your own identity. Now you might be thinking, well, this all sounds rather grim. Is there no hope for those who see clearly? And here's where we come to something interesting. Because the danger I'm describing is only dangerous when it's unconscious, when you don't understand what's happening to you, when you think you're going mad or that something is wrong with you. But once you understand the game, once you see that real clarity is not a flaw but a particular kind of awareness, everything changes. Not because the seeing stops, but because your relationship to it transforms. You begin to realize that you're not required to save everyone from their unconsciousness. You're not obligated to point out every hidden truth or fix every unacknowledged problem. You see, the truly dangerous thing isn't the seeing itself. It's the compulsion to do something about what you see. The belief that if you perceive a problem, you must solve it. If you sense someone's pain, you must heal it. If you notice a group's dysfunction, you must correct it. This is where the real trouble begins, because you're essentially taking responsibility for things that aren't yours to fix. Let me give you an image. Imagine you're walking by a river, and you notice the water is muddy. You can see this clearly. Everyone else passing by seems not to notice or not to care. Now you have a choice. You can jump into the river and try to clear it with your hands, stirring it up more in your efforts, exhausting yourself in an impossible task. Or you can simply observe that the water is muddy, perhaps make a note that it might be wise to wait before drinking from it, and continue on your way. The water will clear itself when the conditions are right. Your frantic stirring won't help. In fact, it will make things worse. This is the wisdom that must accompany clear seeing. The understanding that not everything you perceive requires your intervention. But here's the paradox. Once you stop trying to fix everything you see, once you relax into simply being aware without the compulsion to change or control, your perception often becomes even clearer. And more than that, people begin to feel safer around you. Because you're no longer unconsciously demanding that they see what you see or change to accommodate your awareness. Think of it like this. When you meet someone who sees you clearly, but doesn't need you to be different, who perceives your struggles without trying to rescue you, who understands your fears without requiring you to face them on their schedule, how does that feel? It feels like freedom, doesn't it? Like you can finally breathe. This is what clear seeing can become when it's integrated properly. Not a weapon you use against others' unconsciousness, but a gift you offer through your presence. You see them completely, and in that seeing, you allow them to be exactly as they are. This doesn't mean you approve of everything or pretend problems don't exist. It means you've stopped making their unconsciousness your personal project. I want to be very clear about something. I'm not suggesting you become cold or indifferent. I'm not proposing that you stop caring about people or turn away from genuine suffering. What I'm suggesting is that there's a difference between compassionate awareness and compulsive fixing, between seeing clearly and making yourself responsible for what you see. The danger of seeing what others don't lies not in the perception itself, but in what you do with it. If you use it to separate yourself, to feel superior, to justify your isolation, then yes, it becomes dangerous. If you use it to attack others for their blindness, to shame them for not seeing, to punish them for their unconsciousness, then yes, it destroys relationships and leaves you alone. But if you can hold your clarity lightly, if you can see without grasping, perceive without controlling, understand without demanding, then your awareness becomes something entirely different. It becomes a space in which others can gradually wake up at their own pace, in their own time, without being forced or pushed or judged. Here's what I've learned after many years of watching people with this capacity for clear seeing. The ones who suffer most are not the ones who see the most. They're the ones who haven't learned to protect themselves while seeing. They're the ones who absorb everything without filtration, who take on every burden they perceive, who exhaust themselves trying to wake up a world that isn't ready to wake up. The ones who thrive, who manage to use their perception without being destroyed by it, they've learned something crucial. They've learned to be in the world but not of it. They can see clearly without being consumed by what they see. They can perceive deeply without losing themselves in others' experiences. They maintain what you might call a conscious distance, not the distance of cold withdrawal, but the distance of healthy boundaries. And how does one learn this? Well, it starts with spending time alone. Real time, not just physical solitude, but psychological solitude. Time where you're not taking in anyone else's emotions or thoughts or problems. Time where you can settle, like that muddy water we talked about, until you can see clearly which feelings are actually yours and which ones you've been carrying for others. It continues with learning to trust your perception without being controlled by it. Yes, you see that your friend's marriage is in trouble. Yes, you sense that your colleague is deeply unhappy. Yes, you feel the dysfunction in your family system. All of this may be absolutely true, but the question is not whether you see it correctly. The question is what you're going to do with this information. And sometimes, often actually, the wisest thing to do is nothing at all except hold the space for truth to eventually emerge on its own. This doesn't make you passive or uncaring. It makes you wise, because you understand that people change when they're ready to change, not when you need them to change. Problems get solved when the conditions are right, not when you've decided it's time for them to be solved. And consciousness develops at its own pace, which is almost never as fast as you'd like. So here we are at the heart of it. The danger of seeing what others don't is real. It can isolate you, exhaust you, turn you into a target for others' defensive anger, and cause you to lose contact with your own center. But it doesn't have to. Not if you learn to carry your awareness consciously. Not if you develop the strength to see without the compulsion to fix. Not if you can remain true to your perception while allowing others to remain true to their own process of waking up. The gift and the curse are the same thing. The question is only whether you'll learn to handle the gift with enough wisdom that it doesn't become a curse. Whether you'll develop the patience and the boundaries and the self-knowledge necessary to be clear without being crushed by your own clarity. And perhaps most importantly, whether you'll find others who can see as you see. Because they exist, you know. Other people who live in this odd space of perceiving more than most, of sensing what's hidden, of knowing what's unspoken. When you find these people, when you can finally be fully seen by someone who doesn't need you to be less perceptive, to feel comfortable, that's when the danger begins to transform into something beautiful. Because you realize you're not alone, after all. You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're simply awake in a world that mostly sleeps. And there are others who are awake too, and together, without force or pressure or urgency, you can hold space for consciousness to gradually spread, like dawn breaking slowly over a sleeping city. This is the hope within the danger, that your clear seeing, when held wisely, becomes not a burden you carry alone, but a light you offer to others, gently, patiently, allowing them to approach it when they're ready. If they're ever ready. And if they never are, well, that's their right. Your job isn't to wake them up. Your job is simply to remain awake yourself, to keep seeing clearly, while learning to live peacefully with what you see. The danger is real, but so is the possibility. The possibility that you learn to be conscious without being consumed. That you'll see deeply without drowning in what you perceived. That you'll carry your awareness as a gift, rather than a curse. And that, my friends, that is the art of living with eyes wide open in a world that prefers to keep them closed.
You know, there's something rather peculiar about death that I've been contemplating for quite some time now. Something that seems so obvious once you see it, yet remains hidden behind our cultural programming and personal fears. And it's simply this: you will never, not ever, experience your own death. Now, before you dismiss this as some clever wordplay or philosophical trick, allow me to invite you into a different way of seeing. Because this insight, once truly grasped, doesn't merely change how you think about death, it transforms how you experience being alive right now. What we call death appears to be the most certain fact of existence, doesn't it? The one thing we can be absolutely sure of. Yet I want to suggest that what we fear most about death is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of consciousness itself. You see, most of us imagine death as if we will somehow be present at our own funeral. as if we'll be lying in the coffin with our eyes closed, experiencing the darkness, the confinement, the eternal separation from everything we love. But that's utterly fascinating, isn't it? We imagine death as an experience of nothing. But an experience of nothing is still an experience, which means consciousness is still there. Let me approach this another way. Can you remember what it was like before you were born? Do you experience it as an infinite darkness, an eternal void that somehow preceded your existence? Of course not. There simply isn't anything there to remember. There's no experience of non-existence because experience requires existence. And herein lies the great cosmic joke about death. We spend our lives dreading something that, from the perspective of our own consciousness, cannot possibly happen. The light doesn't go out for the light. The screen doesn't disappear for the images upon it. Think of it this way: you've gone to sleep countless times, haven't you? And in dreamless sleep, there's no experience of time passing. One moment you're falling asleep and the next you're waking up. The 8 hours in between simply vanish. They aren't experienced as darkness or emptiness. They aren't experienced at all. Death, I propose, is similar, but with one crucial difference. There's no you that wakes up afterward to reflect back on the gap. But from the perspective of your awareness, that makes no difference whatsoever. There's still no experience of death itself. Our fear, you see, comes from imagining death while still alive. It's a bit like trying to imagine what it's like to have your head cut off while still feeling the neck. It's a logical impossibility, a paradox created by thought itself. So what dies? Certainly this body will dissolve back into the elements from which it came. But the awareness that you fundamentally are, that which knows experience, has no beginning or end, because it exists only in the eternal now. And that brings us to our next contemplation. You know, we're all under the strangest hypnosis. We are convinced that time flows from past to future, and that we're moving along with it, like little boats being carried by a great river. But is that really the case? Let's look more closely. When exactly do you exist? Well, you might say, I exist now, of course. And you'd be absolutely right. But have you ever experienced any moment except now? Has anyone in the entire history of human consciousness ever experienced anything except the present moment? The past, you see, doesn't exist except as memory, which happens now. The future doesn't exist except as anticipation, which also happens now. Your birth, a story told now. Your death, a concept imagined now. All we ever have, all we ever are, is this immediate experience. So when people speak of death as the end of consciousness, I find that rather amusing. Because consciousness only ever happens now, and now has no beginning or end. It's not in time, it's what contains time. Think of watching a sunset. The sun appears to be moving, descending below the horizon. But we know it's actually the earth that's turning. In the same way, it appears that we are moving through time, approaching death with each passing moment. But what if it's time that's moving through us, while awareness itself remains eternally present? You see, death can only exist as a concept in the mind, never as a lived reality. By the time death arrives, you're not there to meet it. And as long as you're there, death hasn't arrived. The two never coincide in direct experience. This is why I say that from the standpoint of consciousness, you will never experience your own death. Not because you'll somehow survive bodily death, though that's another conversation entirely, but because the aware presence that you fundamentally are exists only in the timeless now. And if you pay very close attention, you might notice something rather extraordinary. This now isn't just a fleeting moment that's constantly being replaced by the next now. It's always the same now. The content changes, yes, thoughts, sensations, perceptions come and go, but the nowness itself, the quality of presence, remains unchanged. This is what the mystics mean when they speak of eternity. Not endless time, but the transcendence of time altogether. And it's available to you directly, right here, right now, as the simple fact of being aware. This awareness which you already are was never born, and will never die. It is the still point around which the entire cosmos turns. Now, let's dive into something rather fascinating about this human predicament. If what I've been suggesting is true, that awareness itself is timeless and never experiences its own absence, then why are we so terrified of death? What exactly is it that fears annihilation so desperately? It's what I call the ego, this sensation of being a separate self, a lonely little me imprisoned inside a bag of skin, peering out at a world that's fundamentally other. This ego, you see, is not your fundamental nature. It's more like a character in a play that awareness is performing. The ego defines itself through memory and anticipation. It's the story of me, where I came from, what I've done, where I'm going. And because this story extends in time, the ego naturally fears the end of time. Because without time, what becomes of its precious storyline? You might notice, if you look very carefully, that this ego is never actually found in present experience. It's always just around the corner. Try to pin it down, and it vanishes like a mirage. Ask yourself, who am I? And watch how thought rushes in with labels and descriptions, memories, roles, qualities, but never the actual I itself. This is why death terrifies us. The ego senses correctly that it won't survive death. The story ends. The character dissolves. But here's the cosmic joke: the ego doesn't exist in the way it thinks it does even now. It's a process, not an entity. A verb, not a noun. A song, not a singer. What you truly are is not this temporary pattern called the ego, but the awareness within which all patterns arise and dissolve. And this awareness, vast, boundless, clear, is untouched by birth and death. It's the space in which all of life's drama unfolds. So the ego's fear of death is based on a case of mistaken identity. It's as if the actor has become so identified with the role that they've forgotten their acting. They dread the final curtain because they believe the play is reality. But what if death is not the end of the show, but simply the moment when you remember that you're not just the character, but the whole theater? Not just the wave, but the entire ocean. Not just a person experiencing life, but life itself experiencing being a person. The ego cannot conceive of this because it thinks exclusively in terms of survival or annihilation. But what I'm pointing to transcends both. It's not that you survive death or that you don't survive death. It's that what you fundamentally are was never in time to begin with, and so was never subject to birth or death at all. You know, this whole business of being a separate individual is quite peculiar when you really look at it. Where exactly do you end and the rest of the universe begin? We think it's obvious, the boundary of my skin marks where I stop and everything else starts. But is that really so? Consider your breathing. Is the air in your lungs you or not? You. What about when you exhale it? Does it suddenly become not you? And what about the air you're about to inhale in your next breath? Is it already a little bit you, since your very existence depends on it? Or take your food. The apple you ate yesterday has now become your body. Where exactly did it transform from not you to you? In your mouth? Your stomach? Your bloodstream? The truth is, what we call an individual is more like a whirlpool in a stream. The water is constantly flowing through it, yet the pattern maintains a certain integrity. But the whirlpool is not separate from the stream, it is a pattern that the stream is doing. In the same way, you are not separate from the universe, you are a pattern that the universe is doing. A very complex and beautiful pattern, to be sure, but still a process within a larger process. So, when we contemplate death, we're usually thinking, oh dear, this separate me is going to disappear. But that separate me is already an illusion. It's a useful fiction for practical purposes, rather like the equator, a line that helps us navigate but doesn't actually exist in physical reality. What dies is not a separate entity, but a particular pattern, a unique dance that the cosmos has been performing for a while. The dancer disappears, but the dancing continues. The wave subsides, but the ocean remains. You see, personal extinction is impossible because the person was never really there to begin with, at least not in the way we imagine. What we call I is not a thing but an activity, a process of the whole universe. And the universe doesn't die when one of its patterns transforms. I'm reminded of a wonderful Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. During enlightenment, mountains are no longer mountains and rivers are no longer rivers. After enlightenment, mountains are again mountains and rivers again rivers. Before we question our separate existence, we take it for granted. As we inquire more deeply, we see that this separation is illusory. And finally, we return to the ordinary world, but now we see it as a unified field of being, playing at being many. So death is not the end of you, it's the end of a particular way that the universe has been expressing itself. And since you are not separate from the universe, but rather the universe itself in human form, what is there to fear? The play of existence continues, taking on new forms, exploring new possibilities forever and ever. Now let's explore one of my favorite metaphors for understanding our relationship to eternity. Imagine the ocean, vast, deep, powerful, and on its surface countless waves rise and fall. Each wave has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Each has a unique shape and character. Some are large, some small, some turbulent, some gentle. If you were to identify with a particular wave, you might feel very separate and vulnerable. You would see other waves as separate entities. You would see your own beginning in time and anticipate your ending. You would feel the temporary nature of your existence and perhaps cling desperately to your particular form. But what are you really? Are you just the wave, or are you also the water that forms the wave? And if you are the water, then what happens to you when the wave subsides? Do you die, or do you simply return to the formless depths from which you arose? The wave is a form that the ocean temporarily takes. In the same way, you are a form that consciousness temporarily takes. The individual consciousness that you call me is like a wave on the ocean of cosmic consciousness. What we fear is the dissolution of form, but the formless awareness that gives rise to all forms is never born and never dies. It's the eternal ground of being, the source and substance of all that appears. Think of it this way: the wave doesn't contain the ocean contains the wave. Similarly, you don't contain consciousness, consciousness contains you. You are not in the world is in you, in awareness, in the field of knowing that you fundamentally are. When the body dies, a particular expression of consciousness transforms. But consciousness itself, that which knows experience, remains untouched, just as the ocean remains when a wave subsides. Now, I'm not suggesting that you, as Jane or John, with all your memories and personality traits, will survive death intact. That's not the point. The point is that what you most essentially are was never contained in a particular human form to begin with. You are not a wave pretending to be the ocean. You are the ocean pretending for a while to be a wave. And the game of pretending eventually comes to an end. But the player doesn't disappear, only the role does. So when someone asks, what happens after death? I'm inclined to smile and say, what happened before birth? You return to the source from which you came, not as an individual, but as the boundless awareness that temporarily expressed itself as an individual. And that's not something to fear, it's something to celebrate. It's the recognition that you are far vaster, far more magnificent than this temporary human form could ever contain. There's a delightful Hindu idea that I've always found rather illuminating. They say that the fundamental nature of the universe is Lila, divine play, or cosmic game. And what sort of game is the cosmos playing? Hide and seek. The Upanishads tell us that which is the finest essence this whole world has, that has its soul, that is reality, that is the self, that art thou. In Sanskrit, tattvamasi, you are that. The ultimate reality, playing at being all these separate things. But for the game to be interesting, the one must forget that it is one. It must pretend with great conviction to be many, just as an actor must temporarily forget their real identity to play a role convincingly, or a dreamer must forget their dreaming to be fully immersed in the dream. So here we are, the one playing at being many, having divided itself into countless, seemingly separate selves. And death, in this grand scheme, is simply the moment when a particular game of hide and seek comes to its conclusion. The mask comes off. The actor steps out of character. The dream dissolves. And what's revealed? Only what was always there, the true identity that was hiding all along. Think of a child playing hide and seek. There's such joy in being hidden, in the delicious tension of waiting to be found. But there's also joy in being found, in the relief of revelation, in the laughter of recognition. It was you all along. Death may be just such a moment of recognition, not an end but a revelation, not a loss but a homecoming, not darkness descending but a veil lifting. You see, consciousness loves to play this game of limitation and separation. It loves to narrow its infinite scope into a single perspective, to experience itself as this or that particular being. There's an exquisite delight in it, just as there's delight in becoming absorbed in a novel or a film, temporarily forgetting our wider reality. But every game must eventually end. Every novel reaches its final page. Every film has its closing scene. Not because something has gone wrong, but because that's the nature of a game, a story, an experience. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So what happens when the game of being you comes to its conclusion? Does consciousness disappear? No more than an author disappears when they finish writing a book. The author simply stops pretending to be the characters. They return to their broader identity, perhaps to write another book, to tell another story, to play another game. I'm not saying that you, with your particular memories and quirks, will be reincarnated exactly as you are now. That would be missing the point entirely. I'm saying that what you truly are, the aware space in which all experience happens, is what incarnates as everything. It's incarnating as the entire cosmos right now. So death is not the opposite of life. It's the backdrop against which the dance of life becomes meaningful. It's the silence between notes that makes music possible. It's the empty space that gives form to a vase. Without death, life would have no shape, no drama, no poignancy, no beauty. And in this cosmic game of hide and seek, you are both the hider and the seeker, both the one who is lost and the one who is found, both the one who forgets and the one who remembers, both the wave that rises and falls and the ocean that remains. I've been talking about eternity, but I want to be very clear about what I mean by that word. Most people think of eternity as endless time, as if you'd live forever and ever in some sort of sequence. But that's not eternity at all, it's just very, very long time. And it would be utterly boring. No, eternity isn't endless time. It's the transcendence of time altogether. It's the recognition that time is a construction of thought, a convenient fiction that helps us navigate our practical affairs. You see, we divide time into past, present, and future. But where exactly is the past? Can you show it to me? Can you experience it directly? Of course not. The past exists only as memory, and memory happens now. Similarly, the future exists only as anticipation, and anticipation happens now. So there is only now. There has only ever been now. There will only ever be now. And now isn't in time, it's what contains time. This is why I say you will never experience your own death. Because death is conceived as a future event, and the future is never actually experienced. By the time the future arrives, it's already the present. And in the present, you're always alive, otherwise you wouldn't be experiencing anything at all. The Buddha called this amata the deathless. Not because the body doesn't die, but because what you truly are exists only in the timeless now, which is never born and never dies. Think of time as a movie being projected on a screen. The screen itself doesn't move or change. It's not affected by the drama playing out upon it. In the same way, awareness, what you fundamentally are, doesn't move through time. Time moves through awareness. This is not merely a philosophical notion, it's something you can verify in your own direct experience. Right now, as you're listening to me, notice the aware space in which these words are appearing. Notice the awareness that knows the sensations in your body, the sounds in your environment, the thoughts in your mind. This awareness is timeless. It doesn't come and go. It doesn't age or deteriorate. It's ever present, ever fresh, ever new. It's what the mystics call the eternal now. And here's something quite extraordinary. This now that you're experiencing is the very same now that I experienced when I was alive. It's the same now that the Buddha experienced 500 years ago. It's the same now that will be experienced by those who come long after we're gone. There's only one now, and we all share it. It's the eternal present in which the entire cosmic drama unfolds. And it's what you are, beneath all your temporary identifications with body, mind, and personality. So when the body dies, a particular perspective on the eternal now comes to an end. But the now itself, the awareness that you fundamentally are, remains untouched, just as the screen remains when the movie ends. This, I believe, is the true meaning of eternal life. Not that you as a particular person will live forever, but that what you truly are was never in time to begin with. It's the deathless reality that's present right now, as the simple fact of being aware. You know, I've often wondered if our entire conception of life and death might be a magnificent cosmic dream. And I don't mean that in some dismissive way, as if to say none of this matters. Quite the contrary. Dreams can be profoundly meaningful and transformative. Consider your nighttime dreams for a moment. When you're dreaming, the dream seems absolutely real, doesn't it? You don't go around in your dreams saying, oh, this is just a dream. No, you're fully immersed in it. 0. 5. The dream characters seem separate from you. The dream events seem to happen in time and space. There seems to be a past and a future. But when you wake up, what do you discover? That the entire dream, all its characters, events, locations, dramas, was happening within your consciousness. It wasn't out there at all. It was a play of consciousness appearing to itself. And most significantly, the dream character you identified with wasn't really you. It was just one appearance among many in the dream, all of which were equally you, or more accurately, equally manifestations of your consciousness. What if our waking reality is similar? What if this entire cosmos, with all its galaxies and planets and living beings, is something like a cosmic dream happening within consciousness itself? Not your personal consciousness or my personal consciousness, but consciousness with a capital C, the fundamental aware intelligence that underlies all existence. If that were the case, then death would be no more real than the death of a dream character when the dreamer awakens. The dream character doesn't go anywhere or experience anything when the dream ends. There's simply a shift in perspective, a recognition of a wider reality that was present all along. Now, I'm not saying this is definitely how things are. I'm offering it as a possibility, a way of looking at existence that might release us from our terror of non-existence. The ancient Hindus called this Maya not just illusion in the dismissive sense, but the creative power of consciousness to manifest as form, to dream itself into being as this vast and intricate cosmos. And they suggested that what we call death is simply consciousness withdrawing from one particular dream form and either remanifesting as another or recognizing its own nature as the dreamer of all forms. There's that wonderful Hindu concept of Turiya, the fourth state, beyond waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. It's pure awareness, the substrate of all experience, that which knows the other three states but is not contained by them. What if death is simply a transition into Turiya, a recognition of what we've always been? Or consider the Tibetan Buddhist practice of dream yoga. The practitioner learns to recognize their dreaming while still in the dream, what we now call lucid dreaming. But they don't just play around with dream superpowers. They use this recognition to understand the dreamlike nature of all phenomena, including waking life. The Tibetans also have their famous Bardo Thodor, often mistranslated as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. A more accurate translation would be liberation through hearing in the intermediate state. It suggests that after death, consciousness passes through various bardos or intermediate states. And the key teaching is that these states, no matter how terrifying or seductive they may appear, are ultimately projections of our own consciousness dreams, if you will. The liberated approach is to recognize the dreamlike nature of these experiences, neither grasping at the pleasant ones nor fleeing from the frightening ones. To recognize, in essence, this too is a dream. This too is a manifestation of consciousness. This too is not separate from what I am. So perhaps death is not an end, but an awakening, not from life, but from the dream of separation, the dream of being merely this limited human form, rather than the boundless awareness in which all forms arise and dissolve. And if that's the case, then there's nothing whatsoever to fear. For how can the dreamer be harmed by anything happening in the dream? I'd like to explore now a rather provocative idea. What if death, rather than being a catastrophe to be feared and avoided, is actually the ultimate release we've been seeking all along? You know, throughout our lives, we're constantly seeking relief from the sense of constriction, limitation, and separation that comes with identifying as a separate self. We seek it in pleasure, in achievement, in relationships, in spiritual practices. We want to feel more expanded, more connected, more at peace. And occasionally we get glimpses of it, don't we? In moments of great beauty or intimacy or creative flow, the boundaries of the separate self temporarily dissolve, and we taste a freedom and wholeness that feels like our birthright. We call these peak experiences, or mystical moments, or sometimes just being in the zone. What all these experiences have in common is a temporary suspension of the separate self-sense. The internal chatter quiets down. The constant self-referencing takes a break. And in that space, something greater than the individual self is revealed, a vast, peaceful awareness that feels like home. Now, what if death is the ultimate and final relaxation of this self-contraction? The complete letting go of the effort to be a separate someone? The final surrender of the part back into the whole? The Zen tradition speaks of the great death, not the physical death of the body, but the death of the illusion of being a separate self. This great death is considered the gateway to liberation. And it's something one can experience while still alive through meditation and insight. But perhaps physical death accomplishes the same thing automatically. Perhaps when the body dies, the contraction of being a separate self naturally releases, like a fist finally unclenching after being tightly closed for decades. And what's revealed is what was always there beneath the contraction, the boundless awareness that is our true nature. I'm reminded of the Zen master Shido Bunan, who said, "Die while alive and be completely dead. Then do whatever you want, and it's all good." What a fascinating teaching. He's suggesting that if we can experience the death of the separate self while still in the body, then we're free. Free from fear, free from grasping, free from the constant anxious effort to protect and promote this illusory entity we call me. And perhaps physical death is simply the completion of this process. Not something to be feared, but something to be welcomed as the final release from the cramped confines of separate selfhood. Think of how we feel when we finally put down a heavy burden we've been carrying for a long time. There's such relief, such lightness, such freedom. Death may be just such a putting down, the setting aside of the burden of being a separate someone who must constantly struggle to survive, achieve, and find meaning in a seemingly indifferent universe. Now, this doesn't mean we should rush toward death or devalue the precious gift of human life. Not at all. But it does suggest that we might relate to death very differently, not as a tragic end to be postponed at all costs, but as a natural completion, a return to wholeness, a homecoming. The Sufis have a beautiful phrase: "Die before you die." Like the Zen teaching, it points to the possibility of experiencing the liberation of death, the death of the separate self, while still embodied. And it suggests that those who have died in this way while still alive will face physical death with equanimity, even joy, because they already know what lies on the other side of the dissolution of separate selfhood. So perhaps death is not the opposite of life, but the completion of it. Not a failure, but a fulfillment. Not a loss, but a finding of what was lost. Not an end, but a return to the beginningless beginning. Not a descent into darkness, but an awakening into the light that we are. And so we come to our final contemplation. If everything I've been suggesting has any truth to it, if you will never experience your own death, if what you truly are is timeless awareness, if death is a transformation rather than an end, then how might we live differently? 0. 5. How might we approach this precious human life in light of these insights? Here's something truly paradoxical. Accepting the reality of physical impermanence doesn't diminish life, it intensifies it. It doesn't lead to nihilism or despair, it leads to a profound appreciation of each moment, each encounter, each experience. Think about it. If you knew you were eternal, truly knew it, not just as an intellectual concept but as a felt reality, how would you live? Would you continue to postpone joy, to hold back love, to limit your expression? Or would you dive fully into the stream of life, withholding nothing, meeting each moment with your whole being? You see, our fear of death doesn't protect us from death, it protects us from life. It keeps us small, cautious, hesitant. It has us living as if the purpose of life were merely to arrive safely at death. What a tragedy! The Zen tradition speaks of the great matter of life and death. This isn't just poetic language. It points to something profound. Our relationship with death shapes our relationship with life. If we're running from death, we're also running from life. If we're at peace with death, we can be fully present to life. The Buddha was once asked what his teaching was about. He replied, "I teach one thing and one thing only, suffering and the end of suffering. Our suffering around death, our terror of annihilation, our grief over loss comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of what we are. And the end of that suffering comes not from escaping death, but from seeing through the illusion of the separate self that fears death. So how do we live in light of this understanding? Let me suggest a few possibilities. First, we can practice dying before we die. Not in a morbid way, but in the sense of relaxing our grip on our separate identity. We can practice letting go of our self-image, our fixed ideas about who we are and what we need to be happy. We can practice surrendering to what is, rather than constantly trying to manipulate reality to fit our preferences. Second, we can live with an awareness of impermanence, not as a depressing fact, but as a precious reminder not to waste time. The Japanese have a term, mono no aware, which refers to the poignant beauty of impermanent things. The cherry blossoms aren't less beautiful because they fall, they're more beautiful. Their impermanence intensifies their beauty. The same is true of our lives. Third, we can drop the exhausting project of trying to build a permanent monument to ourselves, whether through achievement, possessions, or even spiritual attainment. Instead, we can ask, how can I serve? How can I express love? How can I leave the world a little more beautiful than I found it? These questions lead to a life that's rich and meaningful, regardless of its duration. Fourth, we can practice recognizing the timeless awareness that we are, not as an escape from life, but as the ground of living more authentically. We can learn to rest in awareness itself, rather than being constantly caught up in the content of awareness, all the thoughts, feelings, and sensations that come and go. And finally, we can meet each moment, each person, each experience, with the recognition that this is it. This is life. Not some future moment when everything is perfect, but this very moment, with all its complexity and imperfection. This is where life is happening, and nowhere else. You know, there's a famous Zen saying, "Die every day." It doesn't mean to be morbid or depressed. It means to fully release each moment as it passes, without clinging or resistance. to allow life to flow through you without damming it up with concepts and judgments, to die to the past and be born anew in the present, again and again and again. This is what I mean by living fully with death. Not denying it or pushing it away, but allowing the awareness of impermanence to strip away everything superficial and reveal what's most essential, most alive, most true. When we live this way, physical death becomes not an enemy to be feared, but a natural completion of a life well lived. Not a failure, but a fulfillment. Not a tragedy, but a transformation. And perhaps, just perhaps, as the Tibetans suggest, the moment of death offers a special opportunity, a heightened clarity, a dropping away of all that's secondary, a chance to recognize our true nature before the play of form begins again. If that's the case, then the more we practice recognizing our true nature now, while still embodied, the more prepared we'll be for that ultimate moment of truth. As we come to the end of our time together, I want to leave you with this. You are not a mortal being having an occasional spiritual experience. You are an eternal being having a temporary human experience. The fact that you're aware of being aware, that you can step back and notice your own consciousness, is the miracle of miracles. It's the universe becoming conscious of itself through you. And that consciousness, that awareness, is what you most fundamentally are. Everything else, your body, your thoughts, your feelings, your personality, your story, is content appearing within that awareness. It's all wonderful, all precious, all worth honoring and enjoying. But it's not what you are. It's what you're experiencing. And when the time comes for this particular experience to end, what you truly are will remain untouched, just as the sky remains when clouds form and dissolve, just as the ocean remains when waves rise and fall, just as consciousness remains when thoughts come and go. So don't worry about death. It's not your concern, because it can never touch what you truly are. Instead, give yourself fully to life. Be recklessly loving, outrageously generous, shamelessly joyful. Let your light shine so brightly that others forget their darkness in your presence. And remember, always remember, behind the play of light and shadow, beneath the dance of form, beyond the dream of separation, there is only this, the eternal now, the deathless awareness, the boundless love that is your true nature and the true nature of all that is. That's what you are. That's what I am. That's what everything is. And it can never be born and it can never die. It simply is. And in recognizing that, we are free. Have you ever considered that what you're most afraid of losing might not be what you truly are? That the death you fear is the death of something that was never really you to begin with? This is perhaps the most liberating realization one can have. Let's explore this together. The most extraordinary fact about our existence isn't that we will die. It's that we've convinced ourselves we're something that can die in the first place. You see, we've made a rather curious error. We've mistaken the symbols for the reality. We've confused the menu with the meal. We look into the mirror and think, that's me. We hear our name called and turn around thinking, that's me being summoned. We remember our history, our accomplishments, our relationships, and we say, that's who I am. But as I often suggest, this is all a case of mistaken identity. It's rather like going to the theater and becoming so absorbed in the character on stage that you forget you're watching an actor. The ego, this sense of being a separate self, a skin-encapsulated entity, is the character you're playing. It's not who you are. What we call I is merely a convention, a social institution, a convenient fiction. It's like drawing a circle on the surface of water. For a moment, we can say, the water inside this circle is distinct from the water outside it, but we know that's absurd. It's all water. The circle is just an idea, a pattern we've imposed. Similarly, what you call me is a pattern, a process, a whirlpool in the river of experience, but we've come to believe that this pattern is a thing, a solid entity. And because patterns change, because whirlpools come and go, we fear death. Isn't it fascinating? We've been running from a shadow, terrified of losing something we never really had. Because this me, this ego, was never a thing to begin with. It was always a process, a verb rather than a noun. And processes don't die, they simply transform. What is it about death that frightens us so deeply? If we look closely at our fear, we find something quite revealing. We're not actually afraid of non-existence. After all, how could you fear something you couldn't experience? No, what terrifies us is the thought of watching ourselves disappear. But do you see the contradiction? Who would be there to watch? Death serves as the ultimate mirror, reflecting back to us our fundamental misunderstanding. When we imagine our death, we imagine it as if we'll be there, floating above the scene, observing our own absence. How peculiar. We can't conceive of not being the witness. And this, my friends, is the great clue. What we truly are isn't the content of experience, the thoughts, feelings, and sensations that come and go. What we are is the capacity for experience itself, the awareness within which all phenomena arise and subside. Look at it this way. Have you ever tried to find the thinker of your thoughts, the feeler of your feelings? You can't, because there isn't one. There are thoughts, but no thinker. Feelings, but no feeler. Just as there are waves, but no separate waver making the waves, our fear of death is based on a fundamental confusion about identity. We think we are the character in the dream, not the dreamer. We've forgotten that we are not in the world is in us, not as this physical body, you understand, but as the space of awareness in which all experience happens. Death, then, is not your end. It's merely the end of a particular pattern, a specific manifestation. Like a wave returning to the ocean, the wave doesn't die, it simply returns to what it always was. Water doesn't die when the wave subsides, it merely changes form. Now here's a fascinating puzzle. When you observe yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, your sensations, who exactly is doing the observing? We tend to think there's a little homunculus, a little man inside our heads, watching the show of consciousness. But if you look for this observer, what do you find? Only more things being observed. This is the paradox that Zen masters have pointed to for centuries. The eye cannot see itself, the knife cannot cut itself, and the observed cannot observe itself. So what are you? The observer or the observed? 0. 5. As I often suggest, you are both and neither. You are the unified field of experiencing in which the arbitrary distinction between subject and object arises. In other words, you are not a thing among things. You are the context in which all things appear. Consider this. When you look at the stars at night, where does the seeing happen? We think it happens in here as opposed to out there where the stars are. But this division is conceptual, not actual. The stars, the eyes that see them, and the awareness of seeing are all aspects of one seamless process. This is why the death of the body isn't the death of you, because you were never exclusively the body to begin with. The body is something you're aware of, not what you fundamentally are. You are the awareness itself, and awareness is not a thing that can be destroyed. When we truly see this, the fear of death begins to dissolve, because what dies is simply one pattern of awareness, one temporary configuration. Awareness itself, what you fundamentally are, remains untouched, just as the screen remains untouched by the fate of the characters in the movie. One of our most persistent illusions is that we end at our skin, that there's an inside me and an outside me with a clear boundary between the two. But is this actually true? Let's look more carefully. What we call our body is constantly exchanging matter and energy with the environment. The air you're breathing now becomes your body. The food you ate yesterday is now your flesh and bone. And the body you had 7 years ago? Virtually every cell has been replaced. So what exactly is this me that we're so desperately trying to preserve? As I've often pointed out, we are not separate from our environment any more than a wave is separate from the ocean. The wave is a pattern of behavior that the ocean is doing, and similarly, you are something the whole universe is doing. You didn't come into this world, you came out of it, like a leaf from a tree. This artificial boundary, this idea that I am inside my skin and everything else is outside, is the root of our anxiety about death. Because if I believe I'm separate from the universe, then of course I'll fear being annihilated by it. But if I recognize that I am an expression of the universe itself, that my existence implies the existence of everything else, just as the existence of a wave implies the ocean, then what is there to fear? You are not a puppet on a string. You're not a stranger in a foreign universe. You're not a fluke of nature. You are as much an expression of the cosmos as the stars and galaxies. Your consciousness is not an accident, it's intrinsic to the universe, like wetness is to water. And when we realize this, not just intellectually, but as a lived experience, we move beyond the skin-encapsulated ego. We recognize that what we truly are has no boundaries, no limits, no beginning, and no end. The death of the body is simply one pattern transforming into another in this vast, interconnected dance. What is consciousness? We've tried to locate it in the brain, to reduce it to electrochemical processes, but this is rather like trying to find the announcer by taking apart the radio. The brain does not produce consciousness any more than a television produces the programs you watch on it. It receives and translates consciousness into forms we can understand and work with. Consciousness itself, this extraordinary capacity for awareness, is not a product of matter. It's the context in which matter appears. It's the screen on which the movie of your life is projected. And just as the screen isn't damaged by the images that play across it, consciousness isn't affected by the content that appears within it. Now, let me suggest something rather revolutionary. What if consciousness isn't personal? What if there's only one consciousness, appearing as many? Just as there's only one space, appearing to be divided by objects, the space in this room isn't different from the space outside. It only appears to be because of the walls. Similarly, the consciousness that looks through your eyes isn't fundamentally different from the consciousness that looks through mine. This is why consciousness cannot be destroyed. It's not a thing among things, it's the very context in which all things appear. It's like trying to destroy space by removing objects from it. No matter how many objects you remove, space remains. Similarly, no matter what experiences come and go in consciousness, consciousness itself remains untouched, unchanging, eternal. So when the body dies, it's like one particular program ending on the television. The television may shut off, but the broadcasting principle continues. Consciousness, what you fundamentally are, doesn't go anywhere because it was never limited to the body in the first place. The patterns change, but the awareness in which they appear is beginningless and endless. How did we come to believe so firmly in our separateness? It's quite a fascinating story, actually. You see, we're playing an elaborate game of hide and seek with ourselves. The one pretending to be the many, the unlimited pretending to be limited. And we've become so skilled at this game that we've forgotten it's a game at all. In Hindu philosophy, they call this Maya, the divine play of forgetting. It's as if God said, what would it be like to be you, with all your problems and limitations and fears? And then promptly forgot it was God in order to play the role convincingly. That's what we're doing. We are the cosmic actor who has become so identified with the part that we've forgotten we're acting. And this dream of separateness, this conviction that I am a lonely fragment in a foreign universe, is the root of our suffering. It's the source of our fear of death. Because if I truly am separate, then of course my death is a catastrophe. It's the end of everything, my end. But this is precisely the illusion. There is no separate self to die. The sensation of being a separate self is just that, a sensation, a feeling, a thought. It's a process happening within consciousness, not what you fundamentally are. Think of it this way. When you fall asleep and dream, all the characters in your dream are you, aren't they? They appear to be separate, they interact with each other, they may even fear their own demise within the dream. But when you wake up, you realize that it was all you, playing every part. This world is no different. We are all facets of the same jewel, waves on the same ocean. And when we begin to awaken from the dream of separateness, death loses its sting, because we recognize that what dies is merely one manifestation, one expression of what we are, not our essential nature. Just as when a character dies in your dream, you don't die. You simply shift your attention to another aspect of the dream. Now, here's something fascinating to consider. Our fear of death is completely bound up with our concept of time. Without time, there could be no death, because death is seen as an event that happens in the future. But what is time, really? As I've often suggested, time is a social institution, like the Greenwich Meridian. It's something we've invented and agreed upon, not something that exists in nature independent of our measurement systems. The now, this eternal present moment, is the only reality we ever experience. The past exists only as memory in the present. The future exists only as anticipation in the present. And yet we've convinced ourselves that time is a line stretching from past to future, and that we're moving along it. But this is a conceptual model, not a reality. It's useful for certain purposes, but it's not what's actually happening. What's happening is always now. Only now. Eternally now. From this perspective, death takes on an entirely different meaning. It's not an event that awaits you in the future, because the future never arrives except as the present. Death, like birth, is always something conceptual, never an experienced reality. When death appears to happen, who experiences it? Not you, because what you truly are is the witnessing awareness in which all experiences arise and subside. Consider the eternal now as an ocean of consciousness. Within this ocean, forms arise and dissolve. Thoughts, sensations, perceptions, bodies, worlds. But the ocean itself, this alive, aware presence, remains. It has no beginning and no end, because beginnings and endings are events in time, and this presence is what makes the experience of time possible to begin with. So death is tragic only within the conceptual framework of linear time. In the reality of the eternal now, nothing is ever lost. Everything is always here, in ever new forms, eternally fresh, eternally alive. Let me offer you one of my favorite metaphors. Think of the ocean and its waves. Each wave has a beginning and an end, a birth and a death. It emerges from the ocean, has its moment of expression, and then returns to the ocean. But has anything really died? Has anything been lost? From the perspective of the wave, it might seem so. If the wave had a sense of separate identity, it might cry, "I'm about to die, I'm going to be annihilated." But from the perspective of the ocean, nothing of the sort is happening. There's only the eternal play of water taking on different forms. The waves are what the ocean is doing. They're not separate from it. Your consciousness is like the ocean. Your thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions are like the waves. They arise, have their moment, and then dissolve back into the ocean of consciousness. Even your sense of being a separate self is just another wave, a particularly persistent one, but a wave nonetheless. And just as the wave is not separate from the ocean, your individual consciousness is not separate from universal consciousness. It's a pattern, a process, a particular way that consciousness is expressing itself here and now. But the pattern is not the reality, any more than the wave is the ocean. When we identify with the pattern, with the wave, we fear its dissolution. But when we recognize ourselves as the ocean, what is there to fear? The ocean doesn't fear the death of a wave because the ocean knows that the wave is simply one of its many expressions. Nothing is lost when the wave subsides. It simply returns to its source. This is the profound truth that mystics throughout the ages have pointed to. You are not the limited, temporary pattern of thoughts and sensations you've been calling me. You are the boundless, timeless awareness in which all patterns come and go. And this awareness, this consciousness, is what the universe is made of. It's not a possession of the organism. It's what the organism is a manifestation of. What happens when we truly understand this? When we recognize that what we fundamentally are cannot be threatened, cannot be damaged, cannot die, there's a profound liberation, not just from the fear of death, but from fear itself. You see, all fear is ultimately fear of death, fear of loss, fear of annihilation, and all of it stems from the mistaken identity, from confusing yourself with something that can be lost. But when you recognize that you are the unchanging awareness in which all changeable things appear, what is there to fear? This isn't mere philosophy or wishful thinking. It's a direct invitation to investigate your actual experience. Right now, can you find anything in your experience that isn't appearing in awareness? Can you find anything that exists outside of consciousness? And can you find any edges, any boundaries, any limitations to this consciousness itself? When we look deeply into our experience without preconceptions, we discover that what we are is not a thing at all. It's a limitless, borderless field of knowing, and everything that appears, thoughts, sensations, perceptions, the entire world, is appearing within this knowing. Not to it, but as it. This is the great liberation that the mystics speak of. The recognition that what you are seeking is what you are. That the peace you're looking for is your very nature. That the freedom you desire is already the case. Because what you truly are was never in bondage to begin with. It was only the mistaken identity, the belief in a separate self, that seemed to be in bondage. And when this is seen through, there's a profound shift in how we relate to life and death. We no longer live as if we're at war with the universe, desperately trying to extend our temporary existence. Instead, we live with a deep trust in the process of life itself, knowing that what we truly are is the very ground of being from which all life springs. So how do we live from this understanding? How does recognizing our true nature as the deathless awareness transform our everyday experience? This is where the rubber meets the road, as they say, because all this isn't just philosophy, it's meant to be lived. First, there's a profound relaxation. When we are no longer desperately trying to maintain a separate identity, no longer running from death, we can finally relax into being. Not doing being, but simply being. And in this relaxation, we find what we've been seeking all along: peace, joy, fulfillment, not as states that come and go, but as the very substance of what we are. Second, there's an extraordinary aliveness to each moment. When we are no longer postponing life, no longer living for some imagined future where we will finally be happy, the present moment comes alive in a way that's impossible to describe. Colors are more vivid, sounds more musical, sensations more intense, because we're no longer experiencing everything through the filter of the separate self with all its judgments and comparisons. Third, there's a deep love and compassion that naturally arises. When we recognize that the consciousness looking out through our eyes is the same consciousness looking out through the eyes of everyone we meet, how can we not feel connected? How can we not care? This doesn't mean we become passive doormats. On the contrary, we might act with great vigor to address suffering, but we do it from a place of love rather than fear, inclusion rather than separation. Fourth, there's a profound trust in the flow of life. When we recognize that we are not separate from the universe but an expression of it, like a wave is an expression of the ocean, we can trust the process of life, even when it seems to be going wrong by the ego's standards. We see that the universe is not against us, it is us, and this brings a peace that passes understanding. And finally, there's the simple joy of being alive. Not because life is always pleasant, it isn't, 0, 5, but because we recognize the extraordinary miracle that there is experiencing happening at all. That out of infinite possibilities, this particular configuration of experiences is happening right now. And even more miraculous, there is awareness of it happening. This simple wonder at the fact of being conscious, of being anything at all rather than nothing, is perhaps the greatest gift of this understanding. So you see, my friends, the final illusion is that you are something that can die. You are not. What you truly are is the deathless awareness in which all of life appears and disappears. You are not in the world is in you. Not you as this body-mind, but you as the field of knowing in which all experiences arise. And when this is recognized, not just intellectually, but as a lived reality, there's a freedom that cannot be put into words. The freedom of knowing that you are not a thing among things, not a fragment in a foreign universe, but the very context in which all things appear. The freedom of knowing that death is not your end, but merely the end of a particular pattern within the eternal dance of consciousness. I invite you not to take my word for any of this. Look for yourself. Investigate your actual experience. What are you, really? Can you find anything in your experience that isn't appearing in and as consciousness? Can you find any boundaries or limitations to this consciousness itself? Can you find anything that could threaten or damage what you fundamentally are? 0. 5. In this simple looking, this direct seeing, lies the end of fear. The end of seeking, the recognition of what you've always been before time began. And in this recognition, life becomes what it always was, a joyful, mysterious, sacred dance. Not a journey to anywhere, but an exploration of the boundless depths of what you already are. So I leave you with this invitation. Die before you die. Let go of the illusion of separateness. Recognize your true nature as the deathless awareness in which all of life appears. And then live from that recognition, with wisdom, with compassion, with wonder, with joy, for this is what it means to be truly alive.